Hello and welcome to Ildefonso Inc. Today I'm excited to sit down for a conversation with a screenwriter about the craft of filmmaking. Specifically, we're going to talk about the psychology of music in film. And my guest today is Coli Sylla. And did I get that pronunciation correctly?
You got it right on the nose.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So Coli is directing a film called F31.9. Here's the synopsis. It's a story about a successful black investor's life spiraling out of control when a bipolar disorder diagnosis threatens his relationship and career, forcing him to confront the stigma and challenges of managing his mental health. So the way we connected is I saw a thread, which I've been obsessed with, the social media platform Threads. It's an X/Twitter competitor, but I think it's great for creatives connecting. You had posted that you're working on this film and that you were inspired to find music in the vein of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. You mentioned Universal Music Group's new service for licensing, and so I was like, oh wow, there's so many threads here that we could pull on. So firstly, I just want to talk about, like, when you look back on the films that have stuck with you over time, like, who are the screenwriters, who are the directors that have inspired you to make film today, and how does that kind of impact the way you think about creativity?
It's interesting. So when it comes to screenwriters, I would have to say, from a features standpoint, it's kind of hard for me. I have a very weird relationship when I'm watching features. I can just rattle off the bat if you were to ask me television, but we're not talking about television. We're talking about features. I would have to say, that's a great question. Let me give that one some think, because there's so much to there's so much. You know what? Here's one that I actually recently, I'm not going to say I recently discovered, but I recently started studying and researching, and that's Paul Thomas Anderson. Just the way he directs and also the way he writes, and how he was just this sort of wonder kid from California. And there was a scene, I forget the name of the film, but there was a scene where the establishing shot was a gentleman sitting outside of a diner, and just sort of this wide shot, this wide establishing shot, and another character walking towards him. Now, I feel like I should know the names of these people, but I should say that one of the things that I struggle with is memory retention. And so you may hear me kind of trip up on names. And it's not that I'm ignorant or I don't know. It's just that I trip up on names. So I can go thematically and I can describe the scene. And so in terms of the other question you asked, I believe it was, what was the other question?
Directors. Yeah, directors. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite, I think, filmmakers, because There Will Be Blood is one of my all-time favorites. And the use of music in that is so inspiring, outside of the box, but fits perfectly. And then The Master is another one that I loved by Paul Thomas Anderson, and Punch Drunk Love with Adam Sandler. Those are the films that stick out to me from his work. But directors, I know you're influenced by David Fincher. Why don't you talk about David Fincher and why he's an influence?
Oh yeah, absolutely. David Fincher for me is an influence because, number one, he's famous for, multiple takes, 99 takes. His use of space, his use of the environment as a character. I remember watching the making of Facebook, and there's a scene in The Social Network. There's a scene in The Social Network where an extra gets up to move, and he turns that and makes it an integral part of the scene, which was incredibly genius. But one of the reasons why I truly admire Fincher is not only his work as a director, but it's his preparation as a director, going through scene by scene with the writer. And not to pivot, but I can tell you my favorite. Now I can tell you my favorite screenwriter of all time would be Aaron Sorkin, and just because his brilliance with dialogue. But I'm talking about Fincher now, and so with Fincher, it's his lines. And when I say lines, I mean just the symmetry of his scenes, the framing of his scenes, his use of physicality as exposition and how he embraces exposition, where a lot of directors will kind of avoid it and sort of stay away from it. He embraces it. And a lot of, one of the things that he says is that, you kind of know what the camera can do. I'm more interested in what you can't do. And so that philosophy and the direction he takes his scenes in, and I was saying this earlier when we were talking, is he's not afraid to go there. And what I mean is just how graphic some of his scenes are, how graphic some of the violence is. There's a scene in Zodiac where the couple is at the beach and the Zodiac approaches and he proves to them that his 45 caliber is actually real and loaded. And then, he has the characters tie themselves up and then he stabs them repeatedly and there's no cutaway. There's literally just these two characters being stabbed to death, and it's very graphic and it's very cringeworthy. But it's one of those things. It's a Fincher trademark where he doesn't shy away from that pervasive nature and that graphic nature of cinema. And it's one of the things that I try to emulate when I write. And I'm not necessarily from a violent perspective, but from, let's talk in talking about F31.9, just talking about from a mental health perspective and sort of a breakdown of a person's mental health and their psychology and their psychological breakdown and almost, going into a psychotic state.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm also drawn to David Fincher and also Paul Thomas Anderson is, like you said, it's kind of the brutality. It creates stakes for the characters. Even if you just meet someone and if you could connect to that character in Zodiac, in Seven, even we were talking and you mentioned Alien, and even his Alien film has a dramatic tone to it that is alluring from a cinematic perspective. And like you said, his clean lines and, there's definitely a David Fincher thread here with the screenwriter Aaron Sorkin and with your influence of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross.
Yeah.
How did you connect to their music from film, and how do you think about electronic music as a cinematic scoring piece, as opposed to, I know you're also inspired by Thomas Newman. So those are two kind of different styles of approach to cinematic music. So let's talk about the Trent Reznor and Atticus influence for a second.
Okay. Well, I remember Trent Reznor, and if again, with my memory being a little shaky, but he was in 9 Inch Nails. Yes. And I just remember the song. It's one of his more famous songs.
Maybe Hurt
I
or
Want to Blank You Like an Animal. Closer.
Oh yeah. Closer.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I just thought that was such a provocative song. But then when I listened to the soundtrack to Gone Girl, and he's done work previous to that, but when I listened to the soundtrack to Gone Girl, one of the things David Fincher wanted was he wanted lounge music, but he wanted really twisted, kind of sadistic lounge music, and that's where he was able to take it, even from the opening song, What Have We Done to Ourselves? What Have We Done with Ourselves? It's just this very somber intro. And then the horns come in and it's very slow and it's very good in establishing characters. And then he kind of transitions where the intensity sort of grows. And Atticus Ross blew me away with the soundtrack to the Book of Eli. I mean, the first song, Panoramic is one of the greatest songs, one of the greatest opening themes to a film. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, you just have to listen to Panoramic and listen specifically to the end and how it sets up the film. And this is why, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are so powerful, because they can actually set up a narrative with their choice of music and the way the music is composed. It's not it's literally, you can just tell it's studying the film, it's studying the script, and it's literally running with the script, but also creating juxtapositions, also creating sort of these opposing elements that just work well. There's a scene in Gone Girl. I think that when you look at the soundtrack, I think it's called Sugar something. There's a scene in Gone Girl where there's sugar falling from the sky, and it looks like a snowstorm. But the sound, that song that coincides with that scene is just incredibly beautiful, and it's incredibly serene. And again, they complement each other. But just going back to Atticus Ross and Panoramic, the soundtrack to Book of Eli is incredible. But Panoramic, I mean, and you haven't asked me this yet, but one of the things I do when I write is I'll find a theme and I'll listen to it over and over. And I'm not talking about 20 or 30 times. I'm talking about 400 to 500 times. I remember I was one of the features that I was writing that I wanted to submit to Nichols. I spent an entire year, and my wife can tell you, I spent an entire year listening to one song, an entire year. Every time I drove, every time I took a shower, every time I worked, I would listen to this song because I know that they hide the emotionality of the characters somewhere in the song. And it's my job as a writer to find that and to bring it out and to put it into my characters.
Yeah, it's interesting, that push and pull between, like you said, there's this theme that exists somewhere in between the music and the words. And it's like the composers almost need the director's vision to inspire the music. But then once the music is created, it has the ability to speak for the visual in a way that maybe the visual can't speak for alone. And so it's interesting how that cinematic theme can exist somewhere in between the lines. It's this abstract feeling that, and that's what I love about filmmakers, is I think they listen to music deeper, sometimes deeper than musicians and composers do, because for us, it's our craft. And so we make the thing and submit it, but it evolves. And musicians are notorious for not listening to music very often because they get burnt out. Yeah. And so I love hearing from a filmmaker's perspective that you could listen to a song 400 times all throughout the year, and it increases, to me, the art of music because you're mining creativity from that source, and new things are being born in that process of intense listening. And I always, whenever I talk to like peers in music, I'm always reminding them, like, we have to listen as intently as the filmmakers do, because then we're able to speak the language again, and get back into what makes music special, because when you have a session open, you can, as a creative in music, you could be tied into too much of the details of creating the thing, that then we lose the connection to what it does after. And I think great composers understand that magical element that is the abstract. And so it's cool to hear you pull that from Book of Eli, from Gone Girl, films that I've seen that I walked away with a visual inspiration and you walked away with a musical inspiration. And that's the conversation that I like to see between creatives, is how we're inspired by each other, So that's really cool. And then before we go, I want to talk a little bit about the modern age of entertainment, because it affects both of us. Streaming music, streaming visual mediums like feature films, short films, documentaries. How are you consuming content? And then how do you get inspired to create content in an ecosystem that is incredibly saturated? Like, how do you go back? Because we're not in the Fincher days of the 90s, or the Nine Inch Nails days of the 90s, where you have big record labels, you have MTV, you have people going to the cinema as much as they used to. Like, how do we as creatives fight that battle of saturation and accessibility, where like you as a creative have the ability to listen to something intently, but a lot of other people are overwhelmed by all that's out in the market. Maybe they listen to a song once, they love it, and then forget about it because there's so much to listen to. Or they watch a film and forget about it because they're on to the next thing. Like, how do you, as a creative, approach that type of ecosystem?
Well, for me, I am very, and it's funny you asked that, because for a long time, for a long time, I would shy away from answering that question, but I don't shy away anymore. I am incredibly selective about the types of films I consume, as well as the type of music I consume. And it's all tied into whatever I'm working on creatively at the time. And so, I'm not the kind of person that'll just jump on Netflix and just scroll through and find something. If I'm writing something and I have a character who has this deep internal conflict, then I'm doing a little bit of research, but I'm only searching for those types of films. And for example, and I hate to harp on Fincher, but the last film he did for Netflix, The Killer, with Michael Fassbender, you had this very, very complex character who was just in his head so much. And so if I'm looking for that type of character, then I'm going to go with that type of theme. And then another thing is that nobody likes to watch films with me, because I break down and I analyze and I predict, what's going to happen, or I talk about, how I would do certain things a certain way. But for me, like I said, I'm extremely, extremely selective. Like right now, I'm actually going through a Nick Cave and Warren Ellis sort of phase right now. And I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they did the soundtrack to There Will Be Blood. I know they did, if I'm not mistaken, again with my tricky memory, they did the soundtrack to the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. And those two keystrokes, those piano strokes that start the film off, is another stroke of genius. But for me, getting back to your question, it really depends on what I'm writing or the creative space that I'm in, because films have a very profound effect on me. I take it with me well after the film is done. I take the soundtrack with me well after the film or even the TV series is done. When you look at like Game of Thrones, I'm going to butcher his name, so I'm not even going to try to say it.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the composer.
I'm very selective. I don't consume entertainment in a manner that a lot of my peers do, where it's just like, hey, did you see this? Or, hey, did you see that? I'm like, no, I haven't, because I'm just not in the mood. That's not where I am right now. Right now, I'm working. I'm working with trying to understand this relationship between AI and humankind. So I've been listening to a lot of Arcade Fire, just because they did the soundtrack to her. And so, and it's like this one long continuous score. And I just listen to it again, over and over again, and try to figure out what's it saying, what's its relationship with Joaquin Phoenix, what's its relationship with Scarlett Johansson, who I believe was the voice of her. And so that's kind of where I go. There's a reason, there's an intentionality behind everything.
Yeah, I love that answer. And it looks like Warren Ellis did the assassination of Jesse James, and maybe The Road is the one you might have been thinking. He also did Lawless, a lot of Westerns. Yeah. And then There Will Be Blood was Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead. Okay. But yeah, I love that you have kind of a great variety of influences, that like you could be inspired by both Warren Ellis and Trent Reznor. And I think that's what's exciting, is there's a truthfulness to both of their work, but there's a different vibe. It's like it's a different way of accessing real emotions and real storytelling, which I was inspired by when I saw you posting your thread. So if people want to follow along on your journey and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
You can actually go to my website, which is colisylla.com, COLISYLLA.com. And actually, when you go to the website, I just released the visual for F31.9. I just did a visual teaser. And actually, if you listen to the music, I was looking for a lot of, we're dealing with mental health. We're dealing with a character whose mental health is in decline. So I used a lot of percussion, just sort of the bounce back of percussion and what that means. And so I encourage people to go and check it out. But yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me. My social links are on there. If you want to catch me on Threads, which I also love, it's _write_a_writer_. And so that's _WRITE, the letter A, WRITER. So it's write a writer, and it's anchored by 2 underscores. I hope I didn't confuse the audience with that.
No, I think they'll get that. I appreciate you for taking the time and talking film and music. This has been really fun for me, and I'm looking forward to seeing your work in the future. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. And if you like this content, subscribe to Ildefonso Inc. And we will see you guys next time. Later. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.